Hi everyone, in this session we are going to look at this image of India's current Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And what we're going to do is we're going to geolocate and chronolocate this image. What I mean by that is we're going to look at some of the clues in the background to identify the exact location of this image. And then we're going to go a step ahead and we're going to identify the time by having a look at these shadows that are cast and mix those up with the location from the geolocation that we've done, and also some of the context around the event from news clippings and media that we'll find doing a little image reverse search. So strap yourself in with geolocation and chronolocation in this session called Finding Morty. To start this session off, the first question we really want to answer is where. Where is Morty standing right now in this image? Well, we have a few clues, so we can start to look at the mountains in the background and we can look at the helipad. But I always like to start with a simple image reverse search just to see where else this image might be available online, and if it's been uploaded with any context like media articles, news articles, tweets or Facebook posts or anything like that might give us a little bit more information before we start having a look on satellite imagery and scouring around the world to see if we can find those mountains. So let's take a little look. The first place I always like to go to is just Google Images and Google Image Reverse Search. And you can do that image reverse search just by clicking on this nice little icon here that's on the Google search browser called Search by Image. What that does is it lets us upload an image and we can pop that in there right now. I'm going to upload that from my desktop and it'll load the image into the search browser, and woohoo, we have some search results. And we can see that there is a lot of media on this visit with Morty. So I'm going to have a look at the Mumbai Mirror, India Times, and let's see what they've written about this visit. So photos, Prime Minister Modi's surprise visit to Ladakh amid India-China tensions. Great, it looks like we've got the same photo that we were initially looking for as well. So what I can see here is that we already have the name of a location. He was also briefed by senior officials at a forward position in Nimmu. I'm going to check that out. So I've typed in Nimmu up in my search browser up here for Google Earth. And it's taken me to a place that's spelt a little bit different, Nimmoo, but that's quite typical of Google Earth. Sometimes it will auto-correct if you have got the wrong spelling or a different type of spelling or a different dialect or a different type of way of spelling a place name as well. So let's start to use those mountains to our advantage. Now for geolocation, I always like to use the biggest and most obvious object in the background. For this one, we've got mountains, and I really like the look of this mountain. It's got some unique cuts in the side of it. So let's have a look at something like that. And we've also got these peaks here, right? So we have a little, probably a valley that goes through there. We've got two large mountains and then a mountain in the background. If I'm looking for these trees and this valley that goes through there, maybe there might be a river that's going through there as well. So I can see a river already in the location that we found, and I'm going to tilt my camera just a little bit. I don't see those mountains though, right here. So let's have a look at the other direction of the valley. Let's see if we can maybe spot something. Well, the river seems to go that way, but already I'm seeing that nice little mountain that I liked with the slats on the side of it. That's kind of cool. So let's have a look and see if the rest of it fits in. Okay. That looks like a fairly good image to me. Those mountains match quite well. And if we zoom down a little bit more, we can even get a better alignment on that. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That seems like a good fit. And we've also got this line of trees over here as well, because if we zoom out quite a fair way, the only place really in this area with trees is in front of those mountains, which matches this one quite well. So now what I'm going to start to do is, since I have an object or a reference point, a geolocated reference point, I'm going to work my way backwards to find exactly where Morty was standing. So we've got the trees, which means we're probably in front of those trees somewhere. But how do we work our way backwards a little bit more? Okay. Well, if we line our vision up with what we can see there, then we can start to scroll backwards and maybe try and fit these buildings in there. So we've got two buildings. If we zoom in on these buildings here, we can see that they make a different shape to what a normal arch building would, because I can see, and yeah, it's fairly pixelated, but I can see this piece is missing out of this building, which is quite unique. I always like to look for these little unique shapes or jigsaw puzzles, I like to call them, to see where they fit in this picture. We've also got these little stands along like this unique fence line as well, which is quite strange. And this shape of a possible helipad and a road that would come out there. So as I'm scrolling back along the ground here, and since I can align my view like that, I can fly back like a bird from those mountains and see perhaps if I can find that really odd building structure. So I'm going backwards and backwards. I'm looking around for those buildings. I mean, there's a lot of yellow buildings, and it seems to be apparent that there's some that have that little cutout place, as we can see over there. So I'm going to keep scrolling back, and already while I'm scrolling back, I can see something pretty obvious. It's a helipad. Okay, that would probably make sense that a helicopter would land there. So if I'm having a look at this image, those yellow buildings are closer to the mountains, in line with the helipad and the mountains. And it looks like I've got one here, which is a pretty fair match for that building we have. So that's a nice little jigsaw match right there. And it's also got that dotted fence line around the side too. And then that shape that we noticed of the road, and then the helipad gap. Yeah, this looks like a fairly good match. And if we line this up a little bit more, we can see that our image fits in there quite nicely, doesn't it? With these slats on the mountain, we've got the tree line, and then we have these buildings on the left over here with that sort of dotted fence line that we can see there. And then we've got this helipad, and we've even got the painted corner, it seems, on the helipad, or possibly, unless that's a pile of dirt, I'm not too sure. Yeah, so it seems like we have a fair indication of the helipad that Prime Minister Morty was standing on, which is a great start. So now we have a location. It's probably fairly obvious that perhaps the helicopter was parked over here somewhere, and I highly doubt Prime Minister Morty would walk over the sand when there's a clearly good pathway here. So I would say that these guys are actually walking towards the pathway, which is about here. So he would have been standing in about this area here, assuming that the helicopter was parked in the middle area. So we could add a pin here, and we could call this one heli for the helicopter that was there. And I think Prime Minister Morty would have walked this way towards the path there before he gets either a little vehicle or walks over to wherever he's going. So what can we do now? Well, we can start to have a look at the shadows. Since we have an exact location or a fairly accurate idea as to where he was standing, just by using those clues in the background and correlating those clues in the background to what we can see on the satellite imagery here, we can tell that Morty was walking in this direction towards the path here from the helicopter. So now we can have a look at his shadows, and we can start to identify the time of when this was. Now, something I like to do is also correlate the time with media to identify a window of time or a possible date or even a day, because that will allow us to be a little bit more precise about our shadow calculation as well. So when we did the image reverse search for Prime Minister Morty's visit, there is something that I do notice, which is that all of the articles seem to have been written on July 3rd, 2020. And all of them are referring to the visit today. July 3rd, July 3rd, July 3rd, July 3rd. Many of them were referring to Prime Minister Morty visiting that place in Nimmu, or that military base, on July 3rd. Now, in the Hindustan Times here, we also have one that says he landed on Friday morning. If we have a look on our sun calc here, we can see that July 3rd was actually a Friday. But let's double check that with the shadows. Well, first of all, we know that Morty was standing here. In the image that we've got, the shadows seem to be pointing either almost directly down, but a little bit on an angle as well. So if we have a look at the helicopter and then where Morty was standing about here. And I'll create a little pin for that. We can see his shadow wasn't completely straight or parallel with the actual helicopter tarmac, but rather on a bit of an angle. So if I was to draw a line, so I've created a little shadow line just to indicate the possible shadow, but that's kind of too straight. So we can see that his shadow was actually on a bit more of an angle this way. Let's bring that up in SunCalc and recreate this same view. So first of all, to do that, we need to get the coordinates. So I'm going to go back to the helipad, and we had him walking towards the path, so about here. So these coordinates I'm going to grab from here, and I'm going to pop them into the URL in the top of suncalc.org up here. We've already set our date on July 3rd, which is handy. And we want to replicate this exact same shadow line or something similar to it to see the window of time that Morty might have been walking there in this image that we have. In SunCalc, we can do that quite easily by dragging this icon, which represents the sun, up in the top bar here. And you can see that when I do that, the direction of the sun or the position of the sun changes, and thus the shadow corresponding with that would change as well. We can't see the shadow here, so for the purposes of illustrating this for everyone here, I'm going to set the height of the object as 20 meters. Now I know Morty is definitely not 20 meters tall, but that way we can see the shadow a little bit more clearly. So you can see that the shadow corresponds with the position of the sun when I move it. Now we know that the angle was a little bit off. It wasn't straight down the helipad, but it was a little bit off. Now if you see, if I'm straight on the helipad, we are at a time of about 10:32 or a little bit past 10:30. So if I move the position of the sun a little bit more, so it creates that almost cross angle from the corner of this side of the helipad, then we have a time that's closer to 10 a.m. Now, if we have a look at, say, 8 a.m., the shadow is really pushing over towards the other side, which means that this shadow would be a lot more further pointing in that direction. It's not. And if we move our shadow over to 11 a.m., we can see that the shadow is pointing actually towards the upper or the northern corner of the helipad up here, whereas it's not from there. And it's definitely not in the middle as well at 10:30. So that means that this image was taken before 10:30 and after 8:30. We can really narrow that down to a window of an hour between almost 9 and 10:10 a.m. So that's a really easy way to identify when an image might have been taken. Again, this is not a very technical way. If you want to see a more technical way, you can have a look at the shadow calculation tutorial that I did for Boris Johnson. But this is just a quick verification method for Prime Minister Morty to use this image as an example. So this is the other useful thing about geolocation and chronolocation, is that now that we have a location, we could, for example, match this image up to our location as well. So we've got these large yellow buildings in the background, and there are 6 of them. So we could have a look near our helipad where would those 6 buildings be? Well, I mean, there's a fairly good clue right here, right next to the helipad. There's 6 of these buildings, right? And they seem to be over on the far left. But then we also have a long yellow building and a series of green buildings that go towards the water that we have over here. So if we can see that long yellow building, that is before and kind of in front of these yellow 6 buildings. We have the 6 yellow ones, and then we have a long yellow one here, and we have the green ones going towards the water there. So we could draw back again, and we're moving back, and we can also match those shadows, those mountains up too, right? So with these mountains, we can see this large one right here. It's on the other side of the river. We can see these big fingers coming out of this mountain, as well as that ridge line there. We can also flick on our Google Earth to get a bit of a better date range and see what was going on at that time, to see if there's any indication as to what we could identify in there. I think it actually might be this field that we can see right here. We seem to be another fence line away from these buildings, which might be this fence line here. And we can also see the sides of these buildings along here. So it helps us identify other locations like that. And then we could go on to identify the location of where Morty was sitting, but also using these shadows as well. Now that we have those shadows there that seem to be coming out of the back of the soldiers. So because we know it was in this field, we could have a look at the shadows there. And again, doing the same process, we could move our sun calc over to that field and having a look at the shadows that we can see in that article. They're sort of pointing straight down the field, almost. We can move that along and see that actually those soldiers, or that image of the soldiers, might have been taken between 10:30 and 11, just because of the straight line that we can see going down there. So with a little bit of geolocation and chronolocation of one image, we can start to line up a lot of other images that were taken. We can also identify other images of where Morty was walking off the ramp here. So that sort of goes back to our image over here with the ramp that we can identify. And we can see that he would have been walking off that ramp there. And we can also match those shadows up as well in this image. So we could use sun calc and move that back over to the ramp. Those images look fairly straight, except maybe a little bit more down. That might even be towards sort of 10 a.m. to 10:30 or 10 a.m. to 10:20 as well. So what have we done here? We've identified that there are numerous ways to go about geolocation and chronolocation. However, a very simple way is to start with an image of Earth search and then have a look at the clues in the background of the image. And before you know it, you can start to identify the possible location. And then once you have that location, we can use things such as shadows, or we can use buildings, or we can use the weather or anything like that, or seasons, to start to identify a window of time. But another good resource for identifying that window of time is media articles. So news, Twitter, social media posts and things like that. And then cross-checking that with the shadows that are seen in an image, as well as multiple other images. And you can see that just by doing this process, it opens up the field to a number of more images from the exact same scene or exact same scenario. This specific image was widely covered by Indian media when Prime Minister Morty made his visit to border troops. However, I thought this was a really good example just to show you a little bit of easier chronolocation and geolocation than some of the previous ones I've shown, such as Boris Johnson from the UK or other ones that have been more technical and deeper in analysis. So if you want to check out those ones, please do go ahead. That uses the specific height of the object, so the specific height of Boris Johnson. In this one, I didn't look at the height of Prime Minister Morty to do a shadow calculation, but rather just did a much quicker shadow calculation, which is less technical, which means less accurate, but is easier to do with this process. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you picked up a thing or two about this. And if you think that this might help someone, please do share it with them, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.